My name's Ricardo from imhobyrex.com blog. This is my second Microsoft Excel video, and I'm going to briefly and quickly explain what a pivot table is and how to create one. So a pivot table is a table dynamically created from a data set that can be manipulated and drilled into. So this is using the same exact data that I created from my prior video about the VLOOKUP function. And so I'm going to use the same exact data to create a pivot table to show counts and sums of information from this table. So typically you create a table onto a different sheet, and you can make more than one pivot table per sheet to create some kind of a dashboard report. But in this case here, I'm just going to go ahead and make it in the same sheet as the data. So the first thing we'll do is select an area where you want to create the pivot table, and you'll just click the pivot table button from the Insert tab. It's going to ask two pieces of information: the table or range that you want to use as the source for the pivot table, and where you want the pivot table to be created. And so I'll just go ahead and select the table I created to explain VLOOKUPs. And again, since I'm using a table, it's just going to grab the name of the table instead of the range, right? So what you'll first see is a placeholder, and this is actually occupying cells. So, and what you'll see along the right here is the field list. You'll have a whole new menu area for the ribbon here with a bunch of different settings. But right now we're only going to focus on creating a basic pivot table using very basic information. Right? So what you see on the right here, the pivot table fields, you'll see every column that's inside the data set that you're working with, and then you're going to see four squares: filters, columns, rows, and values. So the first two that you can start with are the column and the rows. So what we'll look at here is, let's go ahead and get a count of how many contracts we have. So we'll go ahead and start by putting the document name into the row, and it's actually gonna dynamically create this information using the information it found in the table. And for the top section, we'll go ahead and include the responsible district into the columns. And so you can see already what you have there, and along the top you're going to see the different departments. Now the key area here is the values section. Now if you want to make sure your counts are going to equate the total number of items in your data set, you need to make sure you pick a column that you know for a fact will contain data. So let's say, for instance, we had a row that there was not a department for. So let's say this claims department didn't exist. And because I understand my data area set, I would not use any column that doesn't, that may have missing information, because that count will be excluded. Now you could intentionally use that if you want to count only the items that do have a department associated, but if you want to count all of them, then you're going to need to use a column that absolutely for sure has information. And so I'm going to use the customer number because I know for a fact that there's always going to be information here. So I'm going to drag and drop the customer number into the values, right? So the second I did that, you'll see that the numbers appear, and it looks to me like it's actually adding them up because the total is 1326, and you can see it's a sum there. So by default, it's typically going to sum the information, and so I'll show you how to change that. What you go ahead and do is click the values drop down here and value field settings, and instead of sum you'll select count. But from this menu you can see everything else that you can do with this information. If you wanted average, maximum, minimum, product count, and so on. So, but I just want to see the count because this is simple, and I'll get into more of the technical stuff later. Right, so you can see we have our pivot table here. Now, these labels aren't very descriptive, so I recommend that you change this. Let's say here, documents, customers per department. And then we'll say here's department, and then, I'm sorry, document type. It's actually going to be document type. Right. So now this actually makes sense without you having to add some type of title. And as you saw there, I can drag these around as I see fit. So now, why a pivot table? You know, if you know some functions already, then you probably know how to write all these. Well, first is the obvious one. It took me only seconds to gather this information. I've been in meetings where I've been asked to provide numbers that I didn't have available, and actually while the projector was up, I was able to get the data within 30 seconds, just pivot tabling. The second reason is that it can be manipulated. And so, for instance, I can add a filter. So if I wanted to add a filter for, let's say, the customer name, you see I had dragged and dropped it into the filters area, and it appeared above my pivot table. And actually go in here and filter by customer name. I'll leave that as all there, but I want to show you every time you see one of these icons here, that means you can filter that specific area. Now, the second most important thing, the second thing that makes pivot tables very powerful is that they can be drilled into. So if you're presenting some information and you have a pivot table up, and someone wants to see the underlying data behind a specific data point, you can actually just double click it, and it brings you right to the 20 records that were corresponded to that 20. The finance department has 20 lease documents that need processing. And other ways to manipulate it is that, obviously this can be changed. You can put the document name, the document name up here, and the responsible district, in different ways. Add, remove, and so on. And so that's a very quick and brief explanation of what a pivot table is. Again, let me know what you liked or didn't like about this video. And if this was helpful, please subscribe and give me your feedback. Thank you.